Well, we're going to just continue to push forward and move, as you said, from one country to another when we're talking about imperialism and targeting and the manipulation of the reality in terms of trying to determine the outcome. And we're going to go to the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia specifically, where there's been a lot going on, continues to be a lot going on. And we're very honored to be joined as we continue the show by the Ethiopian-American journalist Hermela Aregawi and Bob Schlehuber, peace builder and co-host of Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, who's just back from Ethiopia a little earlier this week. Bob, Hermela, thank you so much for being with us here in the show.
Eugene, thank you so much for having me. Rania, hi again.
Hello. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Well, just to jump right in, Hermela, let me ask you a question here, because I think one of the elements that a lot of people have been noting is the one-sidedness of the media coverage. And it seemed interesting to me to note that after, hundreds of thousands of people protest in Ethiopia over the weekend, the hashtag No More campaign takes off on social media. All of a sudden, CNN feels moved to interview an advisor to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia. And I'm curious, not so much what you think about the interview, but whether or not you think it portends maybe a slight shift as the sort of self-powered movement of the Ethiopian diaspora and those who are allied with it has exposed so many of the lies by these outlets.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's an accident a year into war, CNN finally speaks to the press secretary of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, right? And you said the reporting has been one-sided. I think that's being generous. I think what a lot of people forget that maybe don't have strong connections to the country is TPLF does not speak for Tigrayans. The story of Tigrayans that are being killed in war, whose kids are being sent into war, whether because they're being brainwashed or forced, is never told. So it's not even one-sided. It's just one element of one side, and that is a fringe group at this point. And it's not a rebel group that's the underdog that's trying to fight for some rights. It's the old guard. It's a group that was in power for nearly 30 years, right? So the way they even talk about them is as if they're just grassroots movement trying to fight for their survival. So they are it's less than one-sided.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, Rania.
Well, I was just going to say, on top of all the one-sided media coverage we're seeing, we saw a new front open up in this war in the last couple of weeks, and that is the role of social media companies in actually trying to suppress the very popular view by the majority, what seems the majority of Ethiopians, both inside the country and in the diaspora, speaking out against the TPLF, against this war, against the Western narrative that's full of misinformation. And against, at one point, this hashtag campaign, Hermela, that you were involved in, No More, really went viral. And then you saw Twitter come out and make this decision that they're not going to allow viral hashtags for Ethiopia anymore. Can you just briefly address the unequal reaction by social media companies to the narrative of most Ethiopians?
Yeah, so let's compare what these two opposing hashtags are, right? So hashtag Tigray genocide starts on the same day where the TPLF attacks the country's soldiers. And now when the government fights back, they say this is about genocide of ethnic Tigrayans. What you're saying when you say this is a genocide is you are telling Tigrayans everywhere that Amharan specifically, but the Ethiopian government more broadly is trying to eliminate your ethnicity. You are fighting for your survival. You've got to kill them before they kill you. So if that's not inciting violence, I don't know what is. When you look at the other hashtag No More, it is literally saying hashtag no more war, no more false narratives that feed fear and hate into people, that divide people, that give people reasons to kill their own brethren, that no more U.S. intervention that's supporting armed insurgency. So the idea that Twitter, for at least temporarily, took off trends from Ethiopia because hashtag No More started trending because of may incite violence is absolutely laughable. They didn't take down hashtag Tigray genocide this year. So it looks like the trend is back, but I think part of it is that the pro TPLF activist camp is very aggressive, as you guys know. So they will mass report accounts. I mean, I don't know what they do with their lives. I don't know if anybody's paying attention to their kids, their parents, their brothers, or their neighborhoods, because they literally spend all this time trying to create this division and feed into the false narrative. So that's part of the problem. I think social media's companies, if they do mean to do well, need to figure out how to not let the bullies that just mass report win over the people that are just trying to do the right thing.
And then, I mean, I guess with Bob, you were actually just there on the ground, and there is the narrative of Ethiopians and the viewpoints of many Ethiopians that are being suppressed, are being whitewashed by these big corporate media outlets. So, Bob, you were just in Ethiopia. What was the sense you saw on the ground there?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And one thing to note is just how well regarded Breakthrough News and the reporting Hermela has done in Addis Ababa and across the country. So many people, Rania shared the interview the two of you all did together last week. And then obviously the coverage that the Punch Out and Breakthrough News has done over the last year, people are paying attention to it. It's so vitally important. And while I was there too, I thought a lot about the audiences that Breakthrough News has. And the fact that y'all bring them these stories to connect U.S. imperialism and aggression around the world, to go from Nicaragua, of what Ben was saying, Ben Norden was just saying, just change out Nicaragua for Ethiopia. I mean, the same thing is happening around the world. And if anything, it's needing to connect these different acts of oppression and violence to build international solidarity. So it was a remarkable opportunity to be there in Ethiopia to cover the situation on the ground. And yeah, just a complete erasure of the Amhara and people from the states of Amhara and Afar, and to go to the internally displaced camp that have been set up outside of Bahar Dar in the Amhara state, where Lake Tana is this beautiful city, internationally regarded. The ecology, the geography, the monasteries that are there, completely damaged by COVID in 2 years of a crisis, with now another crisis on top of it, and to have those voices completely blocked out of US media. And these people, they're not stupid people. They're not poor Africans that are presented by Western media. These are shop owners and business owners. These are civil servants. I mean, these are people that had lives that were running major cultural cities and very needed cities across the Horn of Africa being displaced. And they know they're not being covered in Western media. They are well aware of U.S. sanctions. They were well aware of the suspension from AGOA. They're well aware that in the New York Times, CNN, AP, they know the journalists that are keeping them completely out of the news. They have phone numbers. They're saying to me, it's not hard. Like, I was able to get there, and I have a tiny portion of the resources the New York Times and Washington Post has. And so it's, as Hermela is saying, it's not only one-sided, it is aggressively violent what the U.S. media and Western media is doing, along with the U.S. government and regional governments like the government of Egypt, to name one of many. But it is violently erasing these people. And we wouldn't stand for it with any other conflict around the world or history, to completely ignore the pain and suffering of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at this point. And to be there, it's shocking to see. And then again, just to see the Western media the last day and a half here to talk about the weaponization of aid programs. And you're sitting there saying, well, where are the UN humanitarian trucks trying to get to Amhara right now? Where are those trucks right now? As if the people of Tigray, or as Hermela is saying, these are Ethiopians. And I think I just want to stress that, to come back to what Hermela said. People of Addis Ababa, people that live in Amhara state, they do not see the people of the Tigray state as Tigrayans. They see them as Ethiopians, as one people. And I think that also didn't come through when you read the media, but when you're there on the ground, you see people that are desperate for peace, desperate for unity, and desperate for that country to turn the corner.
No, I think those are very, very important points. And you know, thank you, Bob, for your reporting and going there. And you know, I know you had a package on Political Misfits earlier this week that I think, you know, is very worth people checking out and listening to, with the voices of those who have been internally displaced, people who walked for hundreds of miles to escape this devastation. And, you know, Hermela, I was saying this to someone the other day, you know, they say just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. But I mean, it almost seems like, how is it even possible that there is this network of people, these think tanks, the media, all these people who just immediately turned on this pro-TPLF narrative that is in many ways so easily disproven? I mean, is there sort of like a network that's out there? Is this something that has been developed over years? Is it just a lot of just random bad people with bad takes all at once? I mean, what's going on here with the nature of this coverage?
You know, I used to, as you guys know, I went through an evolution in sort of how I look at this, but I used to think that people were exaggerating when they said that the TPLF looted the country's resources. They hoarded so much money overseas. They just have more money than God, basically, was the perception by a lot of Ethiopians. And I'm starting to believe it's true. I'm starting to believe it's true. I've talked to some people high up that know Ethiopia well, that know Ethiopian politics well, and they say a lot of these officials have a lot of money that they have overseas. So I think from what I've gathered, from what I've been told, they have funded some of the Democrats' campaigns. They pay certain people in civic society to be able to say what they say, and so it's not because there's something special about TPLF or they love their old friends or whatever it is. I think there is a lot of financial incentives. I think there's a lot of bullying and harassing. It's not an accident that they were able to stay in power for 27 years, even though the people did not want them there for the majority of that time. They kill, they torture, they pay people off when they need them to do what they need to do. And one indication of how horrible they were and are being is when you look at their children, some of them are incredible people. I'm friends with some of them. And then others are complete bullies. They live in the US. You had some young guys that were in DC where the protest happened earlier this week that were literally harassing women that could have been their mothers. They thought it was okay to show up at this protest where all people were asking for was for peace. And they are on camera just harassing these women. They feel invincible. So they're here in the United States and feel like they can do that. I just wonder what some of their parents are doing when they have the gun and all the power and all the money in that country. So it's quite the network and quite the arrogance.
Well, then let me just ask you this quick follow-up here. You know, I just have to get your thoughts on what you made of this, I don't even know what to call it, so-called press conference of a so-called alliance, so-called government in exile that happened in the National Press Club. I think it was earlier this week.
It is like, is this how low we've gone? Like, is this the standard? I mean, I could not believe my eyes. Honestly, that was a day for laughs. It was a good day for comedy. I think we all needed it. It just shows how weak the TPLF has become, regardless of how much power and money they have. If those are the best people they could get, I mean, they had these 9 so-called federalists, tribal federalists that represent tribes in Ethiopia. There's no indication that they really do, that they have any real connection or representation. And they had somebody come up there, barely could speak English, and said 110 million Ethiopians are behind all 9 of us, and that we are going to forcefully dismantle the Ethiopian government. Now, if this was a little ragtag group and nobody showed up in terms of media, I would say, well, maybe they just did it on their own. But Reuters showed up. The video was from Reuters. There was New York Times reporters there. So they legitimized these people. I mean, nobody stopped and said, hey, it's odd that you're here in the United States saying that you're going to forcefully dismantle an elected government. I did not hear that question asked. So it's really, you know, where are the adults in the room? Who's running US policy right now? I mean, this is not going to be beneficial for the country in any way.
You know,
yeah,
Bob,
it reminds me, I mean, it's so I was just going to say, it's like any journalist worth their salt should see that happening and maybe ask more questions like, who is behind these people? How did they even put on this press conference? I didn't see any of that asked. I'm curious, do we know any of those details? Like, because most Ethiopians that I saw commenting on it were like, I've never heard of these people. Like, they are nobodies. They literally have zero
exactly
base.
True. Yeah, it was put together. I mean, you could see one of the guys that was helping one of the so-called federalists fix his mic. He has a TPLF or Tigray flag on his hat. So this is a TPLF minion that lives in the United States. What I gather is they're trying to put on this air of organization, like there is this group that is opposed to the federal government. And so it's all a show. It's really all a show. They're trying to hold on knowing that the majority of the horn is against them. They're just trying to make it seem like it's something, but it shows you that if that's the best they can get in terms of representation, they're not doing so well right now.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it just even.
The empire falls. Every empire falls when it doesn't check itself.
No, I think that's a good point. And well, I go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it reminds me, it's more as a comment, it reminds me of like an even bigger joke version of what we saw with like Libya, where you had this government in exile, but it was given a bit more business. What we saw with Syria, what we see with like Juan Guaido in Venezuela, where you have these people just appointing themselves in charge of big countries. But, I think there's something different about Ethiopia because of how big Ethiopia is and how active Ethiopians are, like online English, that it's almost impossible to lie about this. But I'm sorry, Eugene, go ahead. That was just more of a comment than a question.
No, I mean, I think it's a good point. I think it's obviously a relevant point about the role it plays. The only thing I was just going to add is, Bob, I know you had the opportunity to be out there at that massive demonstration in Addis Ababa that took place on this past weekend that, hopefully people saw around the world. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what it was like in that crowd and on the ground amongst the people there.
Yeah, I mean, my last 24 hours there was, again, to read the Western media, to read the U.S. sanctions on the country. You step in there and you're saying, oh my God, am I going to be safe? How's the Ethiopian government going to treat me? And when you're in Addis Ababa, people are obviously on edge. There's obviously great concern in the country and worry, but people are out going about their normal lives. And at early, people told me that the rally was going to start at 9 a.m. It started about 6 a.m. outside my window, just staying there close to Meskel Square where these images are from. And again, it's people that are calling for peace. They're not out there calling for war with the TPLF. They're not calling for war with Tigrayan people. The mood obviously was heavy, but people are calling for an end of conflict. A lot of frustration towards Western media, lots of frustration towards the U.S. government. I think that was shown obviously too, if people watching here talking about the Virginia governor's race, with 100,000 Ethiopians in Virginia switching their vote. Lots of them, I think 80% of Ethiopians in Virginia support the Democratic Party, but 60% of them said they were going to vote Republican because of Biden's policy. So at that rally, lots of people, as you can see, frustrated with mainstream media, frustrated with Joe Biden. The rest of the day, Sunday, again, if a country was about to be taken by the TPLF, people would not be out at funerals, at social gatherings, eating lunch together. There was a relaxed mood. And then I was telling people on Sunday night, I had the chance to interview the deputy commissioner of the federal police who did the investigation into crimes committed by the TPLF. And again, these images are horrific to see from cities. Dead bodies piled on top of each other, animals and livestock killed, crops destroyed. And the deputy commissioner is doing an interview with me, and we're sitting in a private room at the Hyatt, sipping tea, and they show me not only the 9 people that were going to be the government in exile laughing at it, we're also watching the news from the hotel on Al Jazeera with a TPLF official here in Washington, D.C. that has an arrest warrant for them in Ethiopia. And so as Hermela said, it's all a show. If Addis is about to fall, I promise you, the deputy commissioner of the federal police is not sitting at a Hyatt sipping tea with me doing an interview. They would be a little bit more occupied than that. And so the fact that the TPLF is not even in the country, a lot of their leadership not already even there anymore, lots of them negotiating to leave the country in Washington, D.C. doing interviews. But we're supposed to believe that the Addis Ababa, a town of 5 million people that just rejected the TPLF rule 3 years ago, is all of a sudden going to let their capital fall, is absolutely ridiculous. It's just not a true narrative. But again, if you read the Western papers, it says, oh my God, look at what the Ethiopian government's doing. They're unstable. They've lost the backing of the people. The TPLF is going to just march in and take the city. Is absolutely just absurd when you're there, because you're looking around saying, like, this is just not what's happening. And as Ben Norden said, being on the ground, unlike these other media places, you think you're going crazy because what you're reading is not what it's like whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. To Bob's point, if I may add, there's a physical war happening on the ground, right? And then there's a psychological war that's happening on social media, through Western media. The idea is to get Ethiopians to give up on their government and to get them to think, well, there's nothing we can do, and to just fold. So the idea, or the intent, is to break the spirits of Ethiopians, the majority of whom have voted for this prime minister. Like Bob mentioned earlier, Ethiopians as a whole are not stupid, whether they have formal education or not. They know what they've been living under. They know what their experiences are. They don't need anybody else to tell them. And as one of the videos that went viral from that protest that Bob was at in Addis Ababa, there's a woman who was saying, I know you think Africans are stupid, but we're not. We have a government. We know what we're doing. Let us solve our problems. I mean, the idea that Ethiopians are going to accept a regime that was oppressing them for 27 years is ludicrous. I just don't think this is going to be an easy fight. And this, the CNN report that was talking about the TPLF militias are on the outskirts of Addis when they were really 350 kilometers away, showing a picture from 5 months away of soldiers behind a tree that literally look like they're right on the edge of Addis, right? So it's like, the psychological terror efforts are completely ridiculous. And I do see some Ethiopians, start to get worried. And, the role of myself and some of the folks that are kind of in the leadership position, whether it's because of doing journalism or activism, is to say, hold on, like, this is the whole point. Hold on. Do not just, turn your wheel every time they tell you something, because we all know the truth is on our side. We all know people want the best for everybody. What's astounding to me is that Ethiopians, non-Tigrayan Ethiopians, seem to care more about what the poor people in Tigray are going through than the Tigrayan pro-TPLF diaspora. I mean, they literally continue to romanticize this war and advocate for it, not thinking about their family members or their friends that could be just dying and they don't know about it yet. So it's not going to be easy to break the spirit of 100 million people.
Yeah, people got to be careful with these so-called map websites too, saying what's going on. A lot of that is also information.
Yeah, it's important for people to understand, like, I was giggling a little bit when you were saying, like, 300 kilometers away is like, CNN saying, oh, that's the outskirts of Addis. That's ridiculous. I mean, 300 kilometers is like, I think it's like Beirut to Baghdad or something. It's like totally not close. But the point is that actually, what's amazing is the way that the international mainstream media is participating in this kind of psychological warfare, because the purpose of saying that is to basically get soldiers who are on the front lines to be discouraged and scared and to, like, throw down their weapons and run away. So it's funny and silly, but it's also like, that's playing a role in a war when the media does this, because it scares people. Like, we were all watching kind of frightened, like, oh my God, is the capital of Ethiopia about to fall? So it really is amazing. And I think it's also interesting that, there was this pushback recently. CNN did have on, I think it was Becky Anderson, did have on the spokesperson for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. So do you guys, there's a shift a little bit in the narrative. Like, the fact that spokesperson was on CNN was something new to see. And it does also seem like the pushback has been so big, it's so hard to ignore. I mean, do you see kind of a turning point in the narrative at all?
I would say, I hope so, but in many ways.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, I would hope so, but in many ways, again, democracy now, the kind of anti-war, cool, liberal left of America, doubling down the last 2 days, 16 UN staffers detained in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia detains World Food Program drivers, and talking extensively again about Ethiopian government going door to door, rounding up Tigrayans. And you're saying to yourself, again, the TPLF dominated every sphere of society and sat in the regional capital, the capital of the country, for 27 years. They were the military. They were the police. They were the undercover agents. They have the weapons and monopoly on violence for 27 years. And now you're saying their comrades are marching towards the capital. And as much as 300 kilometers is far away, in many ways, it's not. And that's quite terrifying. And they're terrorizing and killing people. And you're thinking that the Ethiopian government, the legitimately democratically elected government, is not going to go door to door and check in and have a conversation with some of those leadership from the military police over the last 27 years is absurd. and they're being casted as if they're Japanese American before World War II being rounded up in detention camps, or Muslims after 9/11 being targeted by US police. And it's like, that's not the equivalent of these people. It's not just average Tigrayans that are shop owners being surveilled and stopped by the Ethiopian government, but yet here Western media is talking as if the TPLF members that are living in Addis Ababa are innocent people that may that are not probably still connected with their friends that are 230 miles away, 150 miles away, marching towards the capital. So yeah, I hope it's changing because of people like Breakthrough News and Hermela, and even My Few Days and Amnesty International coming out with a big report, that just a few of us shedding light on the lies and the misconceptions taking place seems like it's taking and making somewhat of a difference. But again, is it going to stop the U.S. from enacting its interest in the region, or is it just going to lead them to adapt and change and just try a different approach towards their own propaganda?
Yeah, the sad truth is the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and the ideology that they implement is sadly and ironically an ideology that is imprisoning Tigrayans everywhere. It is the opposite of liberation. So there's a lot of Tigrayans that they have either convinced that they're going to win, so they get them to give them information. Maybe they're funding them. Maybe the TPLF itself is paying them to give them information. We know in Dese, Tigrayan Ethiopians that have lived in that city for decades with their fellow Ethiopian neighbors turned on them. They were secretly armed by the TPLF. So when just a week ago, these pro-TPLF activists that claim to speak for Tigrayans were celebrating the prospect of TPLF violently entering Addis Ababa. So the fact that the federal government now going into Tigrayan homes and detaining and questioning and searching is such a horrible thing is just ridiculous. I know people personally who've had their homes searched, who've been detained, questioned, and released. They had nothing to hide. I recognize it's uncomfortable. It's scary to have your house searched, to be detained for some time, but it's just a necessary thing that people have to do so that the country does not collapse. I've spoke with Tigrayans, people that I know who, claim to be oppressed by this government, but they're on the phone talking to me excited about the prospect of this government going down. So you're not that scared. You're not that scared, right? You're just arrogant enough to support this armed insurgency, and you're arrogant enough to root for the house that you're living in to light up on fire because you're brainwashed by this ethnic tribal ideology. So I do hope the federal government is very careful. There's not a lot of abuses, but having to detain and question Tigrayans is just part of the security apparatus right now.
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole point too. I mean, there's an evil logic to it, I think, from the beginning to now about what the TPLF is doing is everything is designed to create the maximum amount of, for lack of a better word, ethnic tension in order to use it as a weapon of war. In the same way, I think that they've used the humanitarian issue by launching their offensive after the unilateral ceasefire. I mean, they're trying to create the conditions that back up what they're trying to say in order to say, well, look, we told you the whole time. And it really is quite the psychological warfare, but it gives you a sense of exactly who these people are and what they've done and what's been going on. So I don't know. That's no question there. I might have cut you off.
No, you were an expert. Like that is right there. Like they're rounding up Tigrayans that have never benefited from them. They have riled everybody up, even in the diaspora, people who did not even relate to their ethnicity and were more Ethiopian. They are creating the very conditions they declared at the beginning that were not the case, right? So it's so perceptive of you to see that. That's why I say they're the opposite of the Tigray People's Liberation Front.
I'm curious, something that I've noticed about this issue that I think is quite fascinating and interesting is the fact that so many Ethiopians are like, I'm getting messages, Ethiopian-Americans, Ethiopians in Ethiopia, being like, wow, because of what the US is doing in Ethiopia, like I'm starting to really look back at all, and you told me this too, Hermela, I'm actually starting to look back at all these other countries that, I thought the US was maybe right to intervene in, but maybe like I got that wrong. And it just seems like a real radicalizing moment. And Ethiopia has been this long time US ally. And now, you see at the protests over the weekend, there was like photos of Ethiopians holding up signs, blasting CNN, blasting the BBC, blasting the US government. So I guess, Bob, I'm curious, while you were there, if you saw that sentiment on display, is there this growing sentiment in Ethiopia that's kind of like, a recognition about American imperialism? I don't know if it was there before, but it certainly seems to be on display now. What was it like on the
Yeah.
ground with that issue?
Yeah. I mean, I just speaking for myself, coming back on that flight, never have I wanted to be less a part of the United States than that. And to come back and saying, I don't want to be part of this project anymore. I feel complicit. I feel a part of it. And as Hermela is saying, kind of how the conditioning done by the TPLF is what the U.S. government has done to our own people in this country, and this false choice between Democrats and Republicans, and thinking that it's okay for our government to act like it is right now in the Horn of Africa is absolutely absurd. And to think that Donald Trump calling for Egypt to possibly bomb the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is any different than Joe Biden supporting the TPLF like he has, as if they're different presidents, and that matters to the Ethiopian people right now, who do not want to be at war with the TPLF, do not want their country's progress to be slowed down, who want to be respected by the international community, as if they see Donald Trump and Joe Biden any differently from one another. And people, yeah, absolutely, that sentiment is loud and clear. And this arc of the last 15, 20 years, from George Bush's invasion of Iraq to Mr. former Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama dropping 30,000 bombs his last year in office, to then Donald Trump to Joe Biden. And you're telling me that people aren't well aware of the scam at this point? No, absolutely. And it's sad, because people were saying we used to dream of living in the United States. We wanted the United States to be that country that everybody aspired to be. We have lots of family in the United States, and we're concerned about their well-being and their safety. But now we're concerned about those living in the United States. And that's just not just in Ethiopia, that's around the world. And it's just, as a citizen of this country, it's sad, it's devastating. And like I said, to continue to live here knowing what my labor has turned into taxpayer dollars helps fund right now in the Horn of Africa, it's sickening.
Yeah. I can relate to that, because I think one of the ways that I learned about American imperialism was through the relentless attacks against the region of the world I'm from. I'm curious, Hermela, I know we talked a little bit about this when I had you on last week, which by the way, for all of those who are watching, if you haven't already seen on my Breakthrough News show Dispatches, I did do a fantastic interview with Hermela last week about this issue. But we kind of like touched on this. But yeah, I'm curious if you have anything to add to that, just about the general sentiment about sort of America's foreign policy, because it's just insane how one-sided the U.S. has been on this. It seems like Ethiopians have this idea that, or feel as though the U.S. government has essentially turned against Ethiopia and is trying to dismantle the country.
Yeah, I think Ethiopian Americans are conflicted. Many of us, myself included, got a lot from the United States. So much of the opportunities that we have, the ability to even speak right now about this, is from living in the United States. And Ethiopian Americans are well aware that the West helped, TPLF sort of oppress voices and was sort of a tool for them. But I don't think that they thought that once the leadership changed, once they protested and died and fought for 20 plus years to get some human rights reforms into that country and get a new leader, I don't think they thought that the United States would stick with TPLF to the extent that it did. That it does. It's not just that the diplomatic false equivalencies, but we know that the United Nations, there are people within the United Nations at the top of the United Nations that are working with the TPLF to redirect humanitarian aid to war. They're sending them communication devices and who knows what else. And so, the U.S. being the biggest donor to the United States, that's an arm of the U.S. And so the extent to which it seems, broadly speaking, the U.S. is going to sabotage Ethiopia is astounding. I don't know that it was within any Ethiopian's imagination. So I'm not going to hold my breath, but I think if anybody is interested in not having another disaster, foreign policy in terms of at least the U.S., the perception of the U.S., it's not too late to correct their path. But like I said, I'm not going to hold my breath, because last week was a new low with those so-called Federalists, and I just don't know what we're going to see next week.
Yeah, I think that's it certainly was quite low. There's no doubt about that. But one other sort of flip side of that coin, Hermela, that I think has been exciting to see, at least for me, is the amount of people coming together in the Horn of Africa and Africa more broadly, and of course around the world, in opposition to what's happening. I mean, seeing, folks from Somalia, from South Sudan, all parts of Ethiopia, Djibouti, Uganda, Kenya, over the past couple of weeks, all sort of uniting around this message of opposing this just ridiculous, insurgency, I don't even know what to call this ridiculous attempt to divide and destroy Ethiopia, has in and of itself, I think, been an important moment, and feels like, I don't know, you never know until you're out of it, I guess, something of an inflection point for Africa writ large, where I feel more people talking about Pan-Africanism, the future of the continent, what it means to actually sort of build an independent, sovereign, equitable country in the context of, all of the geopolitics of the globe. Talk about that if you could, because it really does seem that the outpouring of support, positivity, and coming together is also a big part of this story.
Absolutely. What I've come to learn is that TPLF is not just an Ethiopia problem. It's the reason that Eritreans are in the condition that they're in, because their government has been sidelined and isolated by the TPLF for the last 20 plus years. And so they see the TPLF's elimination as a way of their government letting up a little bit, because they don't have this enemy that they share a border with. So the liberation of Ethiopia from TPLF is also the liberation of Eritrea. When you talk to Somalis, they almost have worse stories about the TPLF and the way that they use their power to oppress and suppress them in the name of eliminating terrorism, Al-Shabaab. So their reach is so much wider than I could have ever imagined. And I think, Eugene, you said this in one of your clips. You called them like the largest imperialist force on the continent, and it seems to be true. When I'm working with people like Simon Tesfar Mariam from Eritrea, Nebiyu Asfaw, who's a community organizer in Denver, Ethiopian community organizer, we're not just talking about our Ethiopia bubble. We're talking about how can we eliminate these systems that oppress the majority of the people for the ultra greedy, for people who are just absolutely insatiable and are willing to let people die and kill people and oppress hundreds of millions of people in order to maintain their power. When I say insatiable, I mean, you've had power for 27 years, you've collected more money than you can ever spend while you're alive. So you would think in 2018, TPLF would just go, you know what? Okay, we've had our reign, but they had to start a war in hopes of getting some more. So they're insatiable. I think that hearing people like Bob Norton talking about Nicaragua, hearing people talk about other countries where similar forces have helped oppress the majority of the people, it's encouraging. It's encouraging because I never wanted to talk about Ethiopia in a bubble. I'm not an ethnicist. I'm not nationalist. I just genuinely believe in the truth. I cannot stand lies that don't take the lives of people into consideration. So yeah, it really has opened up this new movement, and you guys are a part of it, of people who are just humanists first, so it's exciting. I think that the fact that the West was just sloppy on Ethiopia, like they didn't even lie to us well, you know what I mean? So in a way that's been a gift, because it's opened up the eyes of so many people across the continent and across the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And I really appreciate both you and the work you're doing, and Bob, being there on the ground. And I really do. Again, I just want to plug this. I hope folks go listen to the package you put together there for Political Misfits with the voices of those who have been internally displaced by this conflict. Really important to hear that directly. But Hermela, Bob, I'm sure we'll have you back. So this is not goodbye just till next time. But thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Of course.